Hey everyone, welcome back to Talking to the Internet. Again, I'm just so grateful for all of you that are out there listening, rating, reviewing, and sharing the show. I'm excited to announce that this episode is sponsored by Podcorn. As many of you know, if you've ever tried to start a show, there are costs associated with starting the show. There's equipment costs, there's hosting costs, and all of these things add up to the benefit of having sponsors or the benefit of having patrons or having folks that will tip and provide resources for you. So, when I started the show, I thought, I'm going to dip my toe in the water here and try to figure out if I can get some folks to sponsor the show. I didn't have the resources and didn't feel like I had the clout to engage a third-party entity. Then I found Podcorn. So what is Podcorn? Podcorn is a super simple place for hosts of shows like me who are looking for sponsors to find folks who want to sponsor podcasts. You go in, there's a super simple dashboard where you can see who's willing or who's looking to sponsor a show. You can make your pitch to them. You can give them the style of the pitch that you want to do, or you can choose a couple different styles, whether it's an ad or whether it's a kind of a natural review or something that you work into the show. You can browse and choose opportunities that fit what you want to do. You can set your own rates. You can collaborate with brands, and you don't have to make exclusives. The best thing about it is you never give up rights to your podcast, and Podcorn will support you. So I'm excited to have Podcorn as the first sponsor of Talking to the Internet. If you're interested in trying to find a sponsor for your show, I highly recommend you go to their website, podcorn.com, sign up, make an account, look at the available sponsorships right now, submit a couple pitches, and see if anyone is interested in sponsoring your show. Thanks to Podcorn for sponsoring this episode of Talking to the Internet. Welcome to Talking to the Internet. It is my privilege today to have Quinn Rose on the show, and Quinn is a freelance podcast producer and editor. She's the host of multiple shows about art and theater, including Corner of the Sky on the Incomparable Network and Setting the Stage. She's also the host of Pictorial on the Relay FM network. Quinn, welcome to the show.
Hello, thank you for having me.
So, Quinn, what I like to do is start out in the most general possible way, right? With the just tell us your story. Tell us how you got into talking to the internet.
Oh dear. So I first started putting myself on the internet in any way, shape, or form when I was 19 in February of 2016. I released my first episode of a podcast called Solidly Mediocre. So before that point, I was barely on social media. I barely had a Twitter account. I think I started 2 months before that point. I did not know how to use Twitter really. And I just loved podcasts. I loved listening to them. I was a big fan of the Relay FM and the Incomparable networks, which will become very relevant in a moment. And I don't even remember what kind of decision-making process there was behind I should start a podcast. For me, it was a very natural thing of this is a thing that I love, so obviously I should also try to make it, which is an instinct that I've had to quell in recent years, so I don't do 100 things. But I started making this podcast called Solidly Mediocre, which was, you make what you know. So it was about college. I had my friends on in sort of a rotating panel where every episode was a different topic in college, and I had different people talking about various things. And I'd been doing that for a few months when I also started making YouTube videos. This was another thing that I just loved watching vloggers on YouTube, and I decided to just make a channel. There wasn't a strong direction to it. It was just kind of whatever I felt like making. But one day I made a video called The Relay FM Alphabet, which actually came from a game that I would play when I was waiting in lines. My dad and I, when I was a kid waiting in line for roller coasters, would play this game where you would pick a theme and you would make an alphabet out of it. So if it was Star Wars, you'd go back and forth, and I'd say A is for Anakin and he would say B is for Boba Fett, etc. I played this game with a friend of mine on the topic of Relay FM because it was a podcast network that we both really liked. And I thought, hey, that's a good video idea. So I made this whole video of the Relay FM alphabet. I tweeted it out. And again, I really didn't understand how Twitter worked. I didn't think there was a high chance of anyone actually seeing it.
Okay.
There was these people, they're not going to watch this. They did.
Did you at them? Like, how did you?
I did. Like, I added like Mike and Mike Hurley and Stephen Hackett, and at like Relay, and I think I added Casey Liss because I used his whole family in the video. And they obviously like all saw it because that's how Twitter works, and they're not like people with millions of followers where they're not keeping track of their mentions. But this was all news to me at the time. So all these people saw it, and that's where everything kind of changed for me. And I've been working with the Relay FM network ever since that point.
Okay, so there's a gigantic leap there between I send out a tweet and then I'm working with the Relay FM network, right? So help us understand that, or at least I assume that there's a gigantic leap there. Like in my brain, a tweet is a tweet, but at the same time, how did it morph into you actually starting to host shows on the network?
Yeah, it was very weird. It was a combination of kind of being in the right place at the right time. So I put this video out. It caught a lot of people's attention. Everyone was so sweet about it. And then a bunch of people started following me on Twitter, which was terrifying. I cannot stress enough how much I had zero audience. Like, literally no one knew who I was. I had no followers. I had no listener. Like, this was nothing. I was speaking into the void.
You are me right now. This is great.
Yeah, I guess. I don't,
There's hope for me. That's my point, is like there's hope. At some point I will have followers.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, I mean, everyone has a weird story. Like, everybody has their like weird thing that happened, right? And this was mine. And so, but the thing was that when I started getting a little bit of attention, if that video had been the only thing I'd ever done, then that just would have been the end of the story, right? But because I had already been making this podcast, then some of them started listening to it, and I can't really comment on the quality of Solidly Mediocre in the first few episodes. I don't think it was very high, but I assume there was some kind of charm to it. And more important than anything, I think I was clearly demonstrating that I had the ability to regularly make a podcast and to commit to that, and that I cared about it. So, and then concurrent to this, which I didn't know, but I've sort of like learned since then, behind the scenes, this was a period of time when Mike and Steven, who founded and still run Relay FM, were looking to bring more people into the network and to find people who were outside of their current audience, to bring more women into the network. And so I sort of came in at this lucky time where they were like, oh, this seems like a good candidate to work with. So they reached out to me and said, would you be interested in developing a show with us? And I like literally could not believe that was happening. That was about 6 weeks after the video, I think. And then I started working with them right away on a couple of ideas, and we launched a show called Mixed Feelings in November of 2016.
So you literally made a thing with your friend, said, I'm going to make a video about this, and then 6 weeks later, you're working with a podcast network to think about shows and develop show ideas, right? I mean, that's the timeline?
Yeah, it was really weird. It was very overwhelming for me at the time.
That's so cool, though. I mean, it's just so neat to see how people's stories unfold, right? Because I've watched the video, your YouTube video, which if you're okay with it, I would love to put it in the show notes. Are you okay with that?
Oh, sure.
Okay.
It's me, little 19-year-old me.
Yeah, but still, it's a testament to, I don't know, just the tenacity is not the right word. What's the word I'm thinking of? The excitement, the interest, the just sheer joy. I just think it's funny. Like I like, not funny in a bad way, but funny in like it's such a cool video to see both the one that says, okay, here's the Relay FM alphabet, and then the one that follows up and says, all right, you all have asked a lot of questions about how I got to where I am. Here's this video. So I like them both. Talk to me about developing that first show that was going to go on this different network, right?
Yeah, this was a really fun process. I was working directly mostly with Mike through this, and so I had a couple of ideas, and the one that we pursued where I was interested in talking about current events and pop culture, and that was not the kind of show that Relay had before, but they were really cool about being like, yeah, just pursue this, it sounds interesting. And I sort of looked among my friend group for a co-host, and we started recording some demo episodes with my very good friend, Jillian Parker, who was also my roommate. We had just started living together. This was our junior year of college, and it just worked. We had really good chemistry. We have different political opinions on a lot of stuff, which made the show really fun, but we still like very much loved each other and agreed on sort of the basic things of respecting humans and stuff like that. So it made for a really fun dynamic. And then we also talked about pop culture stuff where like we talked a lot about the Kardashians and Taylor Swift and just had fun with it. And so the whole process was basically, we started out with that idea. We recorded some demo episodes. Mike actually ended up naming the show. We didn't have a name for it, but in one of our first demos, we kept saying that we had mixed feelings about something, and that something was Jimmy Fallon. And he was like, I think that's a great name. So that's what we went with. And I'd never worked with an outside artist before. For Solidly Mediocre, I made my own art. It's very basic, but I think it's cute.
I like it too, yeah.
But Simon Buckmaster is the regular artist with Relay FM. He does all of their design work. And so we did some iteration on the artwork. He pretty much nailed it right away, I think. And so pretty soon we had this thing that looked like a show. And from there, it was just a matter of recording a couple episodes. One went out as sort of a members only preview. And then we had our regular episode, which launched completely coincidentally 1 week before the 2016 election.
That's a good time to launch a show. It's called Mixed Feelings, isn't it?
Oh my God, it was a bad time. It was a really bad time. The show... It changed everything. It changed everything for everybody. But like, obviously, the show was supposed to be more lighthearted, and we were supposed to have a lot of political disagreements. And instead, it just turned us into us being like very sad and also very angry a lot. And we still had fun with it, and we still talked about the pop culture stuff and managed to make it work. But it definitely was a much different dynamic than we had developed during the process before the election, when we had thought there was going to be a different outcome.
Yeah. That's it's interesting to hear how external events, let's keep it at that level, right? Like how external events can really influence the creative process, right? I mean, because they do. And sometimes we acknowledge that they're influencing the creative process, and sometimes I don't know if we are able to, at the time, acknowledge how much they're influencing the creative process. But why did you want to start podcasting? Like, why did you want to start putting yourself out there and talking into technology?
For me, it just felt like a very natural thing to do. I don't know. People ask me all the time why I started podcasting, and it seems like it was so long ago now that I really can't even remember what or if kind of decision-making process there was behind this. I loved podcasts. I was so into them, and I just decided to start making them. I was just emulating what I saw. If you look at my earliest shows, like, it's so modeled after the kind of conversational shows I was listening to. The artwork looks like it's a ripoff of a Relay FM artwork, which I didn't intend to at all, but that was just like subconsciously I was just trying so hard to emulate what I was interested in. And I think that for me, it was a very natural thing that was like, oh, of course I should start doing this. And it, like, no one was listening to it, and I didn't even care at all. Like, obviously I wanted people to listen to it, but it was just this idea of like, oh, I'm making a podcast now. Like, this is the fun thing that I get to do. And now I get to experience how this works from this side of it rather than just listening. And I had done some film stuff in high school, and I knew how to I knew my way around iMovie. I knew my way basically around GarageBand. So for me, it was pretty simple to sort of figure out the basic technical side of it. And from there I was like, great, why not do this?
How long did Solidly Mediocre stay around, and then how did you have to balance things once you started Mixed Feelings?
Oh yeah, we did continue Solidly Mediocre until I graduated, more or less, but it was very inconsistent after a certain point, just because it was so dedicated to people being kind of in person in the same room. And so when we were on breaks, it was difficult to get episodes And when Mixed Feelings started, like obviously that was a much higher priority. It was a regular weekly show. It was on a network. People were actually listening to it. And people did start listening to Totally Mediocre kind of after I had a little bit more of an audience, but there definitely was a lot fewer people. So it definitely fell by the wayside. And it's still like we never officially ended it, but there hasn't been an episode since we graduated from college. So, I think one day I'll do a reunion show, but it definitely,
That's awesome.
I sort of like looked at what I was doing and I had to make the decision of like, what is the priority here? And obviously my first priority had to be school because I was a full-time student.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, it was Mixed Feelings. And then it was like sort of everything else I was doing had to come after those two things.
Okay. So then when did Setting the Stage and Corner of the Sky enter into the picture?
Oh, yeah. So we did Corner of the Sky started in June of 2017. So it was like about 6 months later. And that was just a project that I really wanted to start. I love musicals so much. And I was in a musical theater show choir. So I had a lot of friends who loved musicals. And so I wanted to do this show. And it was just this really basic concept. Someone just comes on and talks about their favorite musical for an hour. And so that was another thing too that once I started making podcasts, I was like, well, clearly I have to keep making these forever, and I need to have 10 of them. This is possibly awesome. You can also see this again. Like,
I have no idea what that feels like.
Yeah, and I think this is a very natural thing. And I also think it's like, again, with the kind of people I was looking up to, sort of like a lot of people on Relay have like 5 podcasts because we just keep starting them. And I launched the show in June. And then Jason Snell reached out to me like immediately after I put out the teaser. And he was like, hey, would you be interested in hosting the show on The Incomparable? And here's the part that's a little embarrassing is from the beginning of this idea, thought that it would be a good show for The Incomparable, but was too shy / nervous about it to pitch Jason directly. We followed each other on Twitter, and like he's on Relay, and so we like kind of knew each other. So obviously I said yes, and we moved the show there immediately. But I wish that I had been confident enough to just pitch my idea that I like was excited about to the person that I thought would also be excited about it, and I was not. But it worked out in the end because he's very nice and reached out and like took that initiative himself. So now from that point on, I was also a regular member of The Incomparable, which does a lot of like panel shows and stuff. So I've been over there popping up on different things and working with different projects. And then Corner of the Sky is seasonal, which is how I survive. So basically it's shaken out to there's about 1 season a year, and there are about 15 episodes. And that has allowed me to continue doing that show because if I was trying to do an episode of that every single week, it would not be able to happen. But by making it seasonal, where it's like, okay, we're doing this for like a third of the year, there's an episode every week, then that's much more feasible.
Get us into Setting the Stage, and then the one I didn't even mention before is Pictorial. Talk to us about how those originated.
I have so many podcasts.
Yeah, it's great.
Setting a Stage is very different from anything else I've ever done. It is a mini-series. It's a 4-episode series about the creation of a community theater called Stage East that's in my hometown of Eastport, Maine. And it was really important to me to do because I grew up around Stage East in the Eastport Arts Center. And then when I was in college, I minored in theater. And one day I started reading about my hometown in my readings for class. And that is how I learned that my community theater was founded by a national group of students. Basically, they were like barely out of college who traveled around the country in the late 80s, early 90s, and like made theater in different towns. And the one in my town had continued for 30 years and is still around today. And I thought this was fascinating. So the summer that after I graduated college, I went home for the summer and I was working and I interviewed about a dozen people from my hometown and got the full sort of oral history of this and turned it into a 4-part miniseries about the whole story.
So was that one I assume that one when it was a produced, like you had an idea, you had a flow, you said, I'm going to create X number of packages of information and deliver them that way. Is that accurate?
Yeah, it took me so long to make that I basically, I did all the interviews, and at that point I had a really good sense of the story. And so I outlined it, and I figured out it would be about 4 episodes. I'd outline the episode, and then I would make an episode, and it would like disrupt my outline, and then I have to re-outline everything. And things definitely shifted back and forth as I made it. I've learned a lot doing that, because I hadn't made any kind of narrative content like that before, but it was sort of a big experiment for me in seeing if I could make narrative content. And I learned a lot in how I did it poorly while I was doing it, but I'm really proud of it in the end.
Yeah. So I'm going to jump the gun, and then I'll let you talk about Pictorial.
Yeah.
You have done a weekly show. You've done a show that's seasonal. You've done a show that is much more planned, and we're going to have a certain, packets of information. And then Pictorial's from what I'm seeing here, is it's a every other week show, roughly. What's your favorite style? Like, if you had to pick one of those styles, which one would you want to do, and then why is that your favorite style?
So I'll start by saying my least favorite is weekly shows. You'll notice I do not do that anymore. Oh my God. That is something, lots of people do weekly shows, obviously. It's very feasible, but for me, I found it incredibly exhausting, especially when like my own creative projects are not my full-time job. It's very difficult to do. I am really liking the bi-weekly that we're doing with Pictorial. So Betty and I, my co-host, will record. We'll tend to batch them like a little bit, where we'll record 3 episodes every week, and then those will come out over the course of those like 6 weeks, and then we'll record like a few more. And so that way it allows us to have a little bit more flexibility. We can kind of get ahead instead of like always recording next week's episode this week, and I just feel very rushed. And like I don't have enough time to put in the amount of research that I wanted to put into things. So I think bi-weekly might be my favorite.
All right, so now get us to Pictorial, and what's the origin story there?
Yeah, so Mixed Feelings ended when I graduated from college. I loved doing that show, but Jillian and I were graduating. We would no longer be living together, and Jillian was about to start her career in finance. So basically, she works 27 hours a day.
Yeah, exactly.
And like it's actually ridiculous. I'm sometimes very concerned about her. I love her very much, and we're still very good friends. But there was no way she was going to be able to continue to do a podcast. And I was really not interested in continuing the show with a different co-host. I feel like the show was like very based on our particular chemistry. And also I kind of wanted an escape from talking about the news every week.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah, so we found a nice round number to end it on in our senior spring of college. And then I started working on my next idea that I wanted to produce for Relay FM. I just really liked being part of the network, and I like these people. And so I was very invested in sort of staying in that sphere. And they didn't kick me out or anything. They said I could take as much time as I wanted to sort of figure stuff out. But I had this idea for doing an art history podcast where the focus was on the love of learning and of exploring new topics and basically learning things with the audience instead of being like, I am the expert and I'm going to teach you now. And I had that idea for over a year before I found a co-host. I just sort of sat on it, and I was looking for like who would be the right person to make this with. And I found Betty Chen of the art YouTube channel Articulations. She's wonderful. And I found her YouTube and I watched a bunch of it, and I cold emailed her and I was like, so you don't know me, but I have this idea. I think you'd be great for it. How do you feel? And she answered, and she was like, I was thinking about making a podcast. This sounds like a great idea. Let's talk. And from there was a very similar process to the first podcast I developed with Relay, except that I kind of knew what I was doing more. So like Betty and I did all of that development work sort of ourselves in terms of the title and working out the show, making demo episodes. And then once we had all that set, I sent everything over to Mike and Steven, and I was like, here's my pitch for my next show. What do you think? And then we spent several months figuring out the art. That was a process. And then the show launched in December of 2019.
See, look at your journey though. Like it's so cool because you had said before, oh, I wish I'd had the confidence to just cold email Jason and be like, Jason, Corner of the Sky needs to be on Incomparable. Like, come on, right? And here, like, I don't know what Betty's following was at the time when you reached out to her, but you were just like, hey, you're pretty cool, and I think I want to do the show with you. Would you do the show with me? Right? Like, what a cool journey. Did you like developing the show better, like, without a third party involved? Because the first one, Mixed Feelings, you developed with a third party involved. This one, it was really just you and Betty, and then you pitched it to the network. What style did you like better?
Oh, interesting. I feel like it was relatively the same for both, but it was just the first time I needed more help in terms of what I needed for the show. So the people at Relay's role in that was more of telling me like, okay, like here are the things that you need. And then I would go off and do them and I'd send them back and they were like, great, okay, this is all looking good. Like, here's what you need next. Versus when I was doing it by myself first, I just sort of already knew all of those things. So I was able to be like, okay, here's everything that I need to take this to you. So that's already set now. And we can just like sort of jump ahead in this process.
Nice. Okay. So that we've talked about a lot of different creative works. You also do freelance editing, right? So you, in my mind, when I talk about talking to the internet, right, I talk about it as broadly as possible. So words, voices, video. In my mind, you talk as much via producing shows or helping produce shows or editing shows. How does that play into, or how do you think about that when you're editing a show? What's your thought process through helping others and or putting your voice into the show?
Oh, yeah. I talk way more through my freelance editing than my own words, actually. So that's my full-time job now, is for almost a year now. I've worked entirely in podcasting. And so I work as an editor for a bunch of different shows, and I'm an in-studio engineer for some of those as well. And yeah, it's a process. There are some shows where I have sort of more editorial freedom in the sound of the show in terms of shaping like more decisions about parts of it to take out or moving stuff around. And some it's very clean cut, like you're editing an interview between two people, you take out the ums and ahs because we want this to sound very professional, like very basic things. And so there's a huge range. And in most of my work that I do for clients, I'm pretty anonymous. Some of them do credit me as an editor, an engineer or something. A lot of them don't. So a lot of times my role is to be as invisible as possible. And I think that a lot of times with a good podcast edit, the point is that it doesn't sound like it's edited. Even though it's probably been edited up the wazoo to make it sound like that, it's trying to sound as natural as possible. And so it's a very different kind of work than developing your own show or talking yourself. But I do like find a lot of joy in that, and I'm a big nerd about it. Like when I can take someone's mangled sentence and make it sound like they said it correctly on the first try, I'm very proud of that.
Yeah, for sure. Do you edit your own shows?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Oh yeah. I can't stand the idea of other people editing me. I mean, I am like on the Incomparable, and I sometimes do stuff like this where obviously I'm not editing everything I'm ever on, but no, for me, I'm like, no, that's my baby when it's my own show.
So how did you get into editing?
Yeah, well, it sort of started from that instinct. When I started making a podcast, I was like, well, I don't have any option but to edit it myself. I'm just making this out of my dorm room. Like, who else is going to do this? And then when I started at Relay, I was like, okay, cool. Like, I'll edit my own show. Like, of course, for me, that wasn't even a question. Like, of course I'll edit my own show. This is something that I'm shaping, and I want to make sure it's shaped exactly the way I want to. And I'm so glad I edited Mixed Feelings, because Jillian and I got really off topic all the time. And so I would have been very embarrassed to have someone else edit that. And it used to take me so long. When I started making Mixed Feelings, I'd only ever made like a dozen episodes of a podcast. And so I was not very good at editing, and I was very slow at it. And I made that for a while, and I made Corner of the Sky. And then I moved to Chicago, where I live, in September of 2018 after college. And I've been podcasting for years. I had taught myself editing. I knew how to edit in Logic pretty well. And I'm entirely self-taught. I've never taken any kind of like class or anything in editing. It's all just sort of doing it and figuring out as I go, and occasionally learning something that makes me go, oh my God, how have I not known that this entire time?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But I moved to Chicago where I knew a wonderful person named Alex Cox, who is the best. And I have been friends with them for a while through the internet and podcasting and all that. And when I moved here, they said, hey, we want to hire someone to edit Do by Friday, which is their podcast with Max Temkin and Merlin Mann. And I said, oh, okay. So I started working with them, and they liked my work, and I'm still editing that podcast every single week. From there, like, it just sort of continued in terms of I was working out of the studio in Chicago, and when people needed help with a podcast, then Alex would kind of help direct them towards me because they knew I was looking for work. And I just sort of built up my client base one at a time, and I kept getting better and better at it as I was just doing it more and learning more and more. And then after about 6 months of working part-time jobs and sort of building up that client base, I was able to go full-time in podcasting June 1st, 2019.
Wow.
It's funny because I thought I was really good at editing by the time I got to Chicago. And then after about a year of like editing 5 or 6 shows a week, I learned that I was still very bad. And now I think I'm good at editing.
So what'll be your next hurdle that'll make you go, oh, I was still really bad before, and now I'm even better.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I'm sure a year from now I'll be like, oh, honey, you were not good at editing last year.
Yeah. What if I made you pick one of the two? All right. So you either have to, or sorry, you're only allowed to edit podcasts, or you're only allowed to actually make podcasts. Which one would you do?
That's diabolical.
I know. This isn't even the unlightning round. Like, wait for the unlightning round.
Oh, no. That's really hard because I think that being on a podcast is so much fun and it is really creative. But I also think that ultimately editing is like my true love in a way. It's what I spend most of my time doing. I do feel creatively fulfilled by editing, even when I'm editing other people. And so I think when it comes down to it, I probably would pick to hang back and stay on the editing side.
Okay. And then, because this is the only natural question that comes out of that response, do you have to edit from your home base? Like, do you have to edit from your place, or do you like to edit out at a coffee shop or somewhere else? Not right now, obviously, but in general, do you like to edit somewhere else?
Oh, in the before times, I would edit all over the place.
In the before times.
So I do work at home, and I have a desk at home, and I have a setup here and everything. But I mean, I don't have like a monitor or anything. I just work off of my laptop, so I'm very mobile. I most of the time would work in a co-working space which is also where the podcast studio that I use was based out of. So I would actually be there about 4 days a week. I would say I'd make it down there and work from there. Yeah, but I'm still also like luckily very capable of working from home, and so that has also been fine.
That's proven beneficial in our unique times, hasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. The other thing is without giving away clients, because I don't know if you're allowed to do that, if you even want to do that. Are you doing big, like, production type shows? Are you doing more small indie type shows, or all of the above? Basically, you'll do whatever comes your way.
Kind of all of the above. I work with a mix of independent people and companies, from like a tiny little show that's just a couple of people who want to make a podcast and have some money to throw at it because they don't want to spend the time editing, to like a company that is producing a podcast that's like really important for their brand and they would need to hire a professional to make sure it sounds good, to something like Do by Friday, which has like a really fervent audience and a big like financial support from their Patreon. And so they're like, great, like this is the time to sort of have an editor brought into this. So yeah, there is definitely a range. I like working with people who are independent and who are sort of making passion projects, but I also I'm working with companies is often what pays the bills, and so I work with a bunch of companies too. That's
great. So that's a side of talking to the internet we haven't really hit on the show yet, is talking in I don't want to say from the background, but from not right in front of the microphone, but doing the editing and making people sound realistically better than they sound naturally, because we all mess up, we all blub and and do different things. So that's really cool. So you obviously are a creative person. You obviously have a lot of ideas. You hinted at it earlier. How do they make it through your filter? Like, how does an idea make it down to where you start to act on it, or you start to act on it so much that you then start putting it out there?
I try to give every idea some ability to make it somewhere. And so, like, pretty much every time I have an idea, I will immediately tell someone. I'm not one of those people who just like keeps everything to myself. I have a couple of good friends that are sort of my go-tos, where it's like as soon as I have an idea, I'll be like, "What do you think about this?" And then, depending on like how they react and how I feel about it, I'll try to start working on it in some form of the other. And then, if I find that if I start working on it and it doesn't feel right, or I realize it's going to be a huge amount of work that I don't have time to do, or whatever it is, like, I'll file it away. I have lots of ideas that I would still love to do someday that I'm just like, all right, like, now's not the time. This is gonna go in a box. We're gonna come back to that in 2 to 3 years. And so part of it is just sort of natural selection in terms of like what is actually seems feasible right now. And then from there, it's really following a gut instinct of like, what do I love the most? Because I'm very lucky in that I'm able to make a living working on other people's projects that also gives me a lot of flexibility in how I spend my time. So that even though like I do have all this work to do for other people and clients, I also am able to control my time really well, so that if I want to spend an afternoon just working on a new project, like it's pretty easy for me to make that happen. And so I do have the ability to follow what I'm really passionate about and to choose like, okay, what is actually making me happy to work on? What am I procrastinating on my client work by doing right now? And being able to pursue those instead of trying to strategically figure out like I've never been good at strategizing, like, what's my next career move here in terms of what I'm personally making. It's really, I just try to make what I actually care about, and I've gotten pretty lucky with other people caring about it too.
So the flip side of that question, right, or the flip side of that thought is shutting something down, right? So I'm trying to put all the pieces together in my brain. It seems like the only one you've officially shut down was Mixed Feelings, and that was a fairly natural process because college was ending and you and your co-host were splitting up. But talk about shutting something down or knowing when it's time to shut something down. So maybe think about one of your projects and it's like, how would you know when it's done?
Yeah, well, I also we haven't really talked a lot about YouTube because I don't really do that at all. Okay. But there was a point when I was making YouTube videos, and I started to sort of get into it. It was just fun for me. It was another thing. Like, I love watching YouTube. I still do. Started making them. And there was a period in like 2018 where I started getting like really into it. I was making tons of videos. I started getting really focused on theater, and I had this idea that maybe I could like break out as a theater YouTuber. That didn't happen. And it did get to the point where I realized that just the amount of work that I was putting into it was not giving enough back to me in terms of audience, in terms of return on investment, but just like basically in terms of I could sort of get the same things out of making a podcast that I was getting out of making a video sort of personally and sort of create a fulfillment way. And it would take a lot less time and more people would care about it. There's something like Mixed Feelings where it sort of comes to a natural endpoint because of life circumstances. And there's things like my YouTube channel, which comes to a point where I just had to realize that it wasn't worth it anymore. And I had to make that calculation and sort of feel that out for myself. And so if one of my podcasts gets to that point, and I don't see that super happening because I love the topics that my active podcasts are about so much that they're just like things I love talking about all the time anyway. But if it did get to that point where I just wasn't getting enough out of it, then there would be a time to put that project to bed.
Yeah, and I love the way you described both the internal and the external, right? Because I think it's a both and. I really do. There's got to be this internal drive that wants you to keep going and not procrastinate on the creative thing that you're doing. But also there is an external component, right? Like, that's honest. We want to put it out there. We want to provide value to people. We hope we're providing value to people, whether it's entertainment or education or whatever it is. So that's a really good insight. Okay, so what is your biggest highlight of talking to the internet?
Do you mean like biggest upside or like biggest single moment?
Either and both.
Okay. I think that probably, sort of generally speaking, the greatest thing that I've gotten out of it is talking to people, being able to meet people through the internet who are other creators that I've been able to connect with. Like, I've been able to make more friends and connections through this than I ever would have dreamed when I first started. And also talking to people who enjoy my work from across the world has been so, so cool. And like the first time that I was at a conference and someone recognized me was like one of the greatest moments of my life. It was so cool. Like, it's just the coolest feeling for someone to look at you and say, I see you and I like what you do. That mattered to me so much. That might be, this is a moment that happened at PodCon, the first PodCon, is someone recognized me. And to be fair, it was in Mike Hurley's signing line. So it was like a very self-selected audience there.
No, stop. Don't diminish it. Don't diminish it. It's still awesome. Keep going.
It was very sweet. Someone recognized me and they asked me to sign their PodCon agenda, and it was the only time anyone's ever asked me to sign something. I was very flattered. It was so cool. So that might be one of the single greatest moments. And the other one would have to be when I got the DM from Mike that said, do you want to develop something for Relay? Which is something that I literally didn't think was going to be possible for me, and happened almost immediately setting out on this journey, which blew me away.
Yeah, a complete tangent. But can you imagine being like a musician that walks out on stage and there are just, 70,000 people in the thing, and they're all there to like listen to your music? Because I agree with you. Like, I think having the person ask me, I'll give you full disclosure. Like, I got my first tip the other day, right, for the show. And the fact that somebody would actually go through the process of going in there and like actually putting in their card information and they found enough value in the thing, I was like, oh, wow, it had nothing to do with the money. It was this expression of, I find value in what you do enough to go through these 9 steps to show you that.
Absolutely.
And it was like, that's so cool. And it's just like you, right? Like somebody found enough value in what you did, or they liked it so much that they were like, I want to ask her to sign this, this thing. Can you imagine being a person who does this every day and like walks or like tours around, and there's 70,000 people there and they're all screaming because they want to hear you play the next song? I just can't imagine it. Okay, so what was the other one? Because you said both and.
Oh yeah, so it's overall it's talking to people and meeting people, and specifically it was that moment of getting recognized or being invited to join Relay.
Awesome, thanks. Okay, so now let's do the flip side of that one. What challenges have you noticed that you weren't expecting necessarily?
Oh, God. The internet's very mean sometimes. And I will say that I understand that you're supposed to, like, brush it off. I don't. Every negative thing anyone ever says to me sticks with me for a long time. I'm deeply sensitive. So that has been really difficult at times. It can be very creatively stifling for someone to be very mean about something that you really, really care about. And so even though like I haven't gotten this a ton, I'm not like getting barraged by this, luckily, but it is something that when it does happen is very deeply affecting to me. And so, that is something that if I continue doing this, I will have to eventually either get over or just be sad forever, I guess. But it is something that's super hard to deal with.
What advice do you have for people who are in the creative space, but they're going to get this? It's going to come at some point. What advice?
Oh, man. I guess a couple of things. One, just be prepared for it and understand that it is going to happen eventually at some point. And understand that one person's opinion doesn't make or break you. If you're making something and someone doesn't like it, that just means that the wrong person found it. There's always going to be people who don't like what you're making and they're not important to you. Who's important to you is who is going to like what you're making, and you're trying to find those people. And what's sort of a practical tip to help that is to have a couple of those people on hand. So like make sure that you have some friends or family, like people who are close to you who do consume what you make and who do like it, and who are there to say like, hey, I really liked that last episode of your podcast. And I'm not saying that like, don't go out and be like, compliment me. Although you can, like, if you're feeling down, you need people to compliment you, like, ask for that attention. That's great. But I'm saying that like having people in your life who also genuinely care about what you make, even can help so much overall, because if you see a review that's like, this is terrible, and the next day your friend is like, hey, I really like that episode, then it really helps you put in perspective like, oh, okay, like everyone does not hate me. Some people don't like what I make, and that's okay. I'm not talking to them.
Yeah, this is a similar thing in my real job. My normal job is we get comments from students at the end and you'll get 15 positive comments. And then you'll get 2 students that say like, I hated this class. You looked funny when you wore that one shirt. And like you focus on those 2 and you're like, oh man, I shouldn't have wore that shirt. Right. Or something like that, when you don't even pay attention to the other 15 that were like, oh, this was a great class. Thanks so much. It was so much fun. So I can see that. That's good advice. That's good advice.
Yeah.
All right. Other advice you've given, right, is the work comes first always, right? So if you go watch the video, where Quinn's telling us about kind of that transition into relay, you state the work comes first always. Do you want to elaborate on that, or what other advice can you give somebody who's interested in starting to talk to the internet in whatever form, but they haven't necessarily done it yet?
Yeah. Okay. I have a little bit of advice. The whole idea of the work comes first is, what I was talking about in that one video about how I joined Relay FM. And what I mean by that is that you shouldn't be pursuing something because you think it's going to get you somewhere else. If you are making a podcast, for example, that's what I know, it should be because you love making that podcast. It shouldn't be because you think you're going to get on some network or you're going to get sponsors or like whatever you might hope to get. That's great. Like, have goals, but that shouldn't be why you're doing it. And I hope that I've made it clear over the course of this conversation that like I do things creatively because I love to do them and because I feel internally driven to do them. And I'm someone who's gotten super lucky, and that doing those things has allowed me to achieve some of those goals and to get to a place where I can be really happy. But I wouldn't have gotten to those things if I hadn't been doing the work first, if I hadn't been putting myself out there to be in a place where I could get lucky, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes total sense. Yeah.
And then beyond that, a couple of sort of different pieces of advice. So you're like, okay, great. I'm like doing the thing. I love doing the thing. What next? One, lots of people are available who can help you, and you should ask for help. And you should be able to be like open to learning new things and to asking people to sort of teach you something if you think they might be able to teach you something. You should be open to like reciprocating that, making friends. But also like no one knows how to get on a network. Like no one knows how to get your podcast listened to. Like people who have extremely successful podcasts do not know how to get people to listen to your podcast. So don't ask them that, but ask them like, how do I do this thing in Logic? Like, like focus on building your skills and to build relationships with people before you're trying to build like your iTunes top Apple podcast charting show,
Yeah.
And then in terms of making relationships with people, I want to speak briefly about something that I think has been absolutely essential to my whole journey of talking to the internet, who is my friend Brian Hamilton, who is another podcaster who I met like day one on the scene on Twitter. And we have been best friends for almost 4 years now. We met online and we like see each other all the time now. And when I first started out, he like knew a little bit more than me. So he probably knew a lot more than me actually, but we were still like relatively on the same level in terms of where we were at. And so where we were trying to go, we knew a lot of the same people. And I feel like my friendship with him has been so helpful in terms that like I always have someone that I'm bouncing ideas off of. He can always like help me with whatever I'm doing. Just yesterday, we ran sound checks to each other for some different things that we both were trying. Like having a group of people or even that one person that's like, this person can teach me something and I can teach them something and we can work on different stuff together and like bounce ideas off of each other, I think has been absolutely essential for everything that I've done. And I really highly encourage trying to cultivate those relationships and find other people who are creatively interested in the same kind of work that you are. Yeah,
so that's awesome. That's one of the things that worries me about, all the social distancing that we're doing right now is I find that a lot of the best relationships are they happen at conferences or gatherings or, places where people actually get together. They can happen online. Like, so that's also like yours. It seems like you and Brian were able to make that connection online. Did you get face to face fairly quickly after you had met online?
Yeah, I will say, so we both lived in Boston, and so we were able to meet each other in person pretty quickly. And I also, like, when I first started out, I went to the XOXO conference in 2016, sort of right as all this stuff was kicking off. And that was huge for me. And I got to meet, like, all these people who I'd continued to sort of establish relationships with online, but we did get to meet person. And, like, yeah, unfortunately, that kind of thing does matter a lot. And it can be done online, absolutely, but yeah, that is also a bummer part of this.
Yeah, I hope we get back to the point where we're all physically going to a place and hanging out together again, and having those side conversations that are so fun.
Yeah.
All right, are you ready? It's the
my God.
It's the unlightning round time.
Sure. Yes.
No pressure, all the pressure, as much pressure as I can put on you. Here we go.
Dear God.
Overall, what is your favorite content on the internet?
Oh my God, that's such a big question. Okay. My favorite content on the internet is...
I love it.
It's a huge question.
Yes, I love the lightning round, the unlightning round. I love it.
Okay.
Don't worry, you only have to pick one, and it's only recorded forever and ever, so don't worry. I mean, no pressure.
Okay, I'm going to name a couple of quick things that are coming to my mind, and you can't make me pick one. On YouTube, the Unraveled series from Polygon and Brian Daber Gilbert is definitely one of my favorite things on the internet. Anna Akana's YouTube videos, and the My Brother Me podcast. Everyone listens to it, but it's amazing and it makes me really happy, as well as the Just Between Us podcast and Punch Up the Jam. Both are incredible, so funny, and I listen to them every single week. So, yeah, I picked 5 things, but you can't make me choose.
Okay, I was going to say, you did not stay true to the form of the question, but we're going to move to the next one. Okay, overall, your favorite personality on the internet?
What the heck? Okay. I think that I have to pick... You know what? I'm just going to go on instinct.
And this doesn't mean you don't like other people.
I know, it's so hard. Okay,
I'm making you answer a question.
I like so many people. Okay, I'm going to pick Ashley Ford. She is a writer and a podcaster, and I just think she's super interesting and has a really valuable voice, and I follow her on like every platform and read everything she says.
Awesome. All right, a creator, a show, or some content that you would deem to be on the rise. It's something that the listeners of our show should check out. They should definitely go look at it or listen to it.
You know what? I am going to say Two-Headed Girl, which is made by my friends Alex and Maddie Cox, but it's incredible, and I do think it's on the rise and is doing really great work, and everyone should listen to it.
Did it win an upgradie last year?
It did win an upgradie, yes. I think it won
so.
Best New Show, yeah.
Yeah, I thought so. Okay. All right, and then you're only allowed to listen or watch one piece of content on the internet, and you can watch it in perpetuity. So like you have to pick like a channel or a podcast or something like that. Which one are you going to pick?
Okay. I honestly think I would pick Punch Up the Jam, the podcast. I love this podcast so much. It's so funny and interesting, and I've heard every single episode. And you know what? They could just keep making it forever. I'll just keep re-listening to all the old ones. I picked that. Give me 15 seconds on what Punch Up the Jam is. Punch Up the Jam is a podcast where they take a popular song, they break it down line by line. It's hosted by Miguel Brado. Demi Adijawebe used to be a regular host. He's no longer on it, and there's a different comedian on every time. They break through the whole song. It's really funny, and at the end, they punch it up, which basically they make a really interesting parody of it, usually, okay. Based on the conversation that they had. Nice. All right, and then the last most important question, the final... You know, the whole show hangs on this question. Can you tell us more about your handle, Aspiring Robot? What a question. Okay. Aspiring Robot came from a couple things. I had this idea that I wanted to have a handle that was not just my name, I don't really remember why, but that was like a really thing I had. And I was interested in the concept of robots for the reasons of it was kind of a theme in The Incomparable. There's like a show called Robot or Not. The symbol is a robot. So it was kind of like a fun thing playing off of that, as well as there's a song that I love by my favorite singer, Tessa Violet, called Make Me a Robot, which is very sad, actually. It's a super sad song, but it was this idea of wanting to lose your emotions and to become a robot. And for me, it really spoke to me in terms of the idea of wanting to achieve perfection in a world that is fundamentally imperfect. And so I called myself Aspiring Robot, of this person who is, it's kind of like dorky and fun, but there's also this layer of like, I want to achieve something that is not achievable. And I'm decided to make something quirky and fun out of that concept, and instead of focusing on how dark it is.
Perfect. Quinn, thank you so much. Thanks for being on the show. Thanks for sharing with us. Thanks for teaching us what it's like to talk on the internet and different ways to talk on the internet. Where can people find more about you?
Well, you can follow me on Twitter at AspiringRobotFM, and on my website, aspiringrobot.com, that has pretty much everything I've ever made on it. So if you're interested in anything I've said, it'll be on there.
Thanks so much. For those of you out there listening, thanks for listening to the show. If you want to find more about Talking to the Internet, you can go to our website, talkingtotheinternet.com, or check us out on Twitter at TTTI Podcast. Thanks so much. Thanks for learning with us, and look forward to visiting with you at the next show. Thanks.
This has been a Schwa Schwa production.